All right, guys. Hey, and welcome to this episode of TNCBA Real Talk Live. Guys, we're going to be breaking down the Cherokee tournament. It was our first event of the season, Kelsey. And for you all, once again, the Harveys put it on us in February with a tight line. How'd it feel to get off to a good start after having an awesome 2021? You kick off 2022 with a bang. Did it feel good?
It felt pretty good. I'm not going to lie. I mean,
Were you a little stressed out?
I wanted to do good because, going into it, looking back at last year, I mean, if you finish any place other than first, you're starting behind.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was kind of neat.
And you had the Angler of the Year trophy from last year, and you want to come out, you want to make a good showing. So it feels good to come out and prove that last year wasn't a fluke. You still kept that momentum going, and things worked out really well. And, guys, we had a really good turnout. We had like 17, 18 boats. Had a few guys that couldn't make it to us because some other things came up. Hated to miss those guys out there with us, but had a great turnout for the first one. The fishermen turned out, Kelsey. Cherokee, not so much. It was, as I put in the description down here, guys, it was feast or famine. And
Definitely,
you could see that from the results. And we talked a little bit on our preview show. We talked about how the Tennessee Team Trail, like, the weights fell off really quick. You had those 3 18-pound bags. Now, we didn't bring anything that big. Y'all still had a very solid bag. But our tournament was like a microcosm of what happened there for the Tennessee Team Trail. We had 2 bags up there pushing the 14-pound mark, and you all up there pushing 15, and then it went 6.5, then 3.5, and then
it was a tough day.
It was a very tough day.
The conditions were against everything. I mean,
yeah. And so we had a very, very cold morning. It's been a while since I've seen that much frost on the boat.
Oh yeah.
And it was extremely difficult to deal with line, and my guides were icing up really bad. And I had a lot of trouble with line. You had talked to me there a couple hours in, and I was probably on my third knot working out of my line. I finally had to strip all of it off my spinning rods, and I was a little bit fit to be tied. I'll be honest with you. It was frustrating to have that kind of start to the year and have those things messing with you because you spent your time prepping and stuff. But sometimes dealing with the cold and just what the environment throws at you, you just got to learn to deal with it. I should have put some real magic on there, conditioned that line a little bit better, and that would have helped out a lot. So we had really cold conditions that morning. It warmed up, but with the wind, it never felt super warm.
It never felt like it anyways.
No, it was always a little bit cool and chilly throughout the day. And the sun, Dad had talked about, they're talking about some clouds rolling in a little bit later. No, there was no clouds out there. They never showed up. So it was some interesting conditions for our first one. Now, I will say this, though. Those of you watching, if you're somebody that's getting ready to go fish down on Cherokee, I would have much rather had last week's conditions.
Definitely.
As opposed to what those guys are dealing with this week. Because, man, the water's coming up quick. I was checking it for me and Snyder are going to fish in Morristown Marine next week. And the water temperature the water level, just watching it and kind of keeping an eye on it, it's supposed to jump up 6 feet here in the next 48 hours. And we both know it's going to be muddy. There's going to be tons of debris. And who knows what those fish are going to do. And I figure that
freak out.
They're going to freak out a little bit. Yeah, they're going to be they're going to have stuff flying at their heads down the main lake, but I figure TVA is probably also going to they're going to let it fill up for a while, and then they're probably going to suck the bottom back out of it. Planning on some more spring rains to roll through. But guys, let's go ahead and get to some of the action. We'll talk about our agenda here. If you're watching with us on Facebook, be sure to hit that share button, hit that like button. If you're not following the TNCBA on Facebook, be sure to do that. If you're over on YouTube or you also watch us on YouTube for some of our other videos, be sure to subscribe, guys. Hit the like button and share those things out there as well for us. But kind of our agenda for this show today is we're going to talk about the conditions as we already did. Then we're going to talk a little bit about dealing with dock talk and spinning out a little bit. I had a little bit of a moment here, guys, where I spun out. And one good thing that I love about our club is guys are willing to share. They're willing to help you. And Kelsey and them got on early bite. He's like, hey, dude, they're hitting the fly. I should have just said, all right, and hung up on him right then and there. When he told me what they had, that's when my wheels started to spin. It was too good. My practice was bad, and I was thinking things would be tougher than they were. So we'll get into that for a second. Then we're going to talk about third and second place and the weights they had and what they did for their winning pattern, or for their patterns to finish there in the second and third place. Which very different from what Kelsey was doing in a way.
In a way.
And then we're going to take a quick commercial break to thank our sponsors, which for these shows, guys, it is Tri-City Logistics, Uncle Ray's, Knoxville TVA Credit Union. And we'll take a quick commercial break for those guys. And then we're going to come back, guys, and you're going to want to see this. We're going to actually have some video footage from the Harvey's Day. We're going to break down what they were doing, talk about how even the question that David asked us last week about fishing those northern banks with the sun on them, how that plays in, and it played a big part in your all's tournament, didn't it, Kelsey?
Yeah, it did. It did. I mean, that was the thing.
Was finding those sunny banks. So let's go ahead, guys. And with those conditions, we said it was cold, tons of frost. You were dealing with the elements. The wind picked up probably about 2 hours in, wouldn't you say, Kelsey?
Yeah, and that made it tough. I mean,
it did make it tough because it was a stout wind. It was not something that was just here and there.
For whatever heat was gained, the wind took it away.
The wind took it away. Sure. And it made any type of finesse fishing that much more difficult. So we all get out there. We get boats launched. Everybody's gone. Me and Dad head down the lake. And guys, when it comes to developing a plan for a tournament, you have to be willing to change, but you also have to be willing to change based on your instinct and what you know to do. And sometimes it's easy to get spun out when you see other things going on. You see somebody over here throwing a jerkbait, or somebody over here throwing an A-rig. This person's Demikian out in a place. You're like, what did they find out there? I didn't see anything. And one thing that I noticed with Dad as we pulled into, and we had been working a gut that went around an island. So it was 2 guts, actually. Came around both sides of this island. You had a saddle on the back side, Kelsey. Mm-hmm. And we had found some good fish in there. We had found plenty of bait, of course. And sometimes you can find too much bait in these scenarios. But what we noticed was on that saddle, there's several brush piles.
Yes.
And those fish, there were still some out in that gut. But we kind of eased back there where we'd had some warm days leading up. And there was tons of fish in those brush piles. And that's where we actually got our first couple bites. So we picked up a Ned rig, threw it into those brush piles, and pulled 2 out. I was really shocked that one of those was not a keeper bite, and that would have really settled me down some. And we're sitting there working those brush piles, and you holler at me, and you're like, hey, man, they're eating this fly, dude. And the bigger thing that threw me off a little bit is you're like, they're shallow. And I was like, I wasn't expecting that first thing in the morning. I was thinking, okay, maybe a little bit later in the day they'll bump up here and they'll get a little bit shallower. So I was like, okay. And I was like, well, how many you actually got? And you're like, well, we got like 3 already, and one of them's a little like 4.5. And I was like, oh God. I was like, I have totally missed the boat on this thing, and I'm ruined. I'm like, okay. So we stopped talking, and we pull out to the mouth of that, and there's some big boulder and rock, like you said, y'all are fishing and stuff. So we pick up that Ned rig, and Dad catches a keeper. I'm like, okay. And then a little while later, Kelsey's like, hey man, you got you some now? I was like, we got one. You're like, yeah, we got our limit now. We've had a few extra. I'm like, oh my gosh. So the biggest thing, the mistake I made, and again, I love the advice. I appreciate the advice, because like I said, guys, that's one thing about this club. These guys are willing to help you out. You're in a bind. You're like, man, I didn't have a bite all day. You pull up to them. They're not going to say, hey, yeah, go over here. I was throwing a purple crankbait or a pink crankbait over here, and send you down the wrong path. They're going to help you out and point you towards some fish. And what I did is I still ran my game plan, but I didn't give it enough time. Like, I didn't settle into the other areas that we had been fishing, and I rushed it too much. And what hindsight is, and I love the ability to sit back and look at like the GoPro video and stuff. Yeah. And I know some people look at you like, man, what are you doing video when you sell fishing? That's ridiculous. You learn a lot.
Yeah. I mean, in the moment, a lot of times you're not paying attention to what's going on. So if you have that video, it's just like when football players go back and watch watch films from recent games, or watch film from their opponents.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, you can sit back and study it, and see what you did and see how you're actually working that bait or whatever.
Like you said, almost all of a sudden you catch a fish over here and you're like, now I see why. You get to look at it from a little bit different angle. And the hindsight here is looking like, guys, like I said, we had $14.89 for you all. We had a 13.5 pound bag, and then it dropped off. And where I was pressing myself thinking, gosh, we got to make this work. We got to make this work. We got to get some bites. Really didn't have to as much as I thought we did because 5th place was 198. It was tough. Like I said, we're weekend anglers. A lot of these guys don't get to practice. They jump out there. So I should have settled in and been like, okay, run the game plan fully. Let it play itself out. And one thing that we're going to talk about, guys, as we go, even though these fish were shallower, during the wintertime, they are grouped up. Okay, and that's one thing we heard from 3rd place, 2nd place, 1st place. Those that caught multiple fish, these fish were still grouped up in small sections along the bank because you all were still fishing Main Lake. It wasn't like you are way back in a creek or anything like that.
I mean, it was a big, long arm that goes back in there, but I mean, we're right on the point.
Yeah, you're right there on the main lake. So, but they were still grouped up, and we'll get into that. So, guys, if you all have any questions, if you all have any comments, drop those into Facebook, drop those into YouTube. We will answer those questions in the second portion of this video. But let's go ahead, Kelsey, and let's talk about 3rd and 2nd place first and kind of what they were doing and what was going on. So what was the number one bait you heard out of both of those teams' mouths?
I didn't get to talk to Andy. I didn't get to talk to Andy.
You got to be my media man.
But I know that Steve, Leg, and Reg were fishing a jig. That was, and I mean, I know that's a go-to.
And you know the jig that it was.
Oh yeah,
good old bitsy bug. I know how y'all like that, Mr. Leg. So they were throwing a bitsy bug. Andy Hodges and Keith Lester. I know they had to leave early and we got them weighed in, but jig as well.
Okay.
So the thing was, the stain in that water had cleared up quite a bit. In the preview show I talked about on the Saturday before, it was pretty well stained, and it had cleaned up a little bit, still stained.
Oh yeah, still.
Tell me this: when you all stopped there on that first spot, or when you got down to your next spot where you caught your fish, excuse me, guys, were you worried about it? Did the stain bother you any?
So when we pulled into our first spot, it was a little darker. I mean, the stain was a little more prevalent there.
Right.
It was a little more dingy. So then when we went down to our next spot, it wasn't much better, but it was just a little bit better.
So it had cleaned a little bit.
It still bothered me because of the bait that I was throwing. Really, it's a visual bait, and you would think, I mean, it's just a little tiny.
Yeah, you feel like you want them to be able to see it really, really well.
And that's what in my mind is like. I think it's gonna be a tough day.
Right.
And then Dad caught his first fish on it, and then I was like, okay, I'm gonna pick it up. I've been bitten by it too many times not to throw it.
Yep.
So
you stuck with it.
I let my stubborn ways go.
Well,
in those cases, because
there you go, it played in your favor in this case. But up the river as well. So you all went down.
Yes.
Lester, Hodges in 3rd place. They went way up. They're up around the White Church and stuff, around Quarryville, and that's where they catch their fish and get their bites. He said they got their first bite right there near the cut through and then on up on the bluffs. So they were still Main Lake, but they were fishing that jig, and they kind of said the same thing. These fish were in less than 5 foot of water. Now, main difference is you had all brown fish.
Yep.
They were throwing at green fish up there, but they were fishing that jig, working it slow.
What kind of water temperature were they seeing?
Yeah, I did talk to him about that, and that was the other big difference, guys. So where we were finding like mid-40s down that way.
I was seeing 42, 43 all day.
Now it had cooled off a lot. It had cooled off a lot. Like I said, it had been mid-40s when I was down there. That cold night really slowed it down or lowered it. They found almost 50 by the end of the day, they told me. So that played a big part. And guys, it's a two-edged sword when you've got stain. Now the key was, we talked about it on the preview show. I need to quit saying key so much, but that stain had been there for a while. So that water had time to warm up. Those fish had time to acclimate to it. I would be much more nervous with it getting blown out like it is right now in many of these creeks and rivers, because this is not stain or mud that those fish are acclimated to at this point, and it's going to take some time. But now that stain that's going to sit in there after this rain, you get into next week when we've got high 50s, high 60s, muddy water is going to warm up quick. So they found some warmer water. Those green fish like to play better in the warm water for sure.
I mean, we both know. I mean, they really get lethargic when it gets cold. I mean,
and that's why we talked about, both of us, our game plan was to go down the lake. You know, get down there around some smallmouth that are a little more active in the colder weather and stuff. And so these fish that they caught were up shallow on jigs. I think Andy said he was throwing a football jig, and maybe Lester was throwing a little bit smaller jig, but yeah, so they brought those fish in. They had some green fish, and I'm pretty sure they talked about losing a good one as well up there in the river. But then we go to second place, Lester and Leg, and these were the closest two to you. All right, you had Hodge and Lester, which beat everybody out with 6.5 to finish third. But then your next closest competitor there in second had 13.5. So that was a very good bag coming from them, and they said, Reg said he ran some of the stuff he wanted to go tight line earlier in the morning. Yeah. And then they decided to go up, and they went way up. Now, Leg and them, they like to fish even way past the White Church and way up in there. And they found some really warm water and caught those fish on a bitsy bug. And I know how Leg has talked to us about how he likes to fish that bitsy bug. I mean, they crawl it.
Oh, yeah.
It is not like a hop or much of a pop. I mean, he's almost reeling it. But they were up there and
it's more of a worm type.
Yeah, it's almost like a worm.
More like a worm.
And so they got those bites on that bitsy bug, and they had some really, really good largemouth. I think Reg had one that was $3.99.
$3.99,
almost 4 pounds. So he had big fish there for a while on the largemouth. So you see the tail of the two ends of the lake, really. With you having all smallmouth that we'll get into here in a second, and them getting up into some that stained water that was warmer up there in the river, and finding them some green fish. But again, strengths, guys. That's one thing I will say here. You know, Hodge, Lester, they like to go up there in the river. Leg loves to go up there in the river. I mean, that was what him and the late great Ron Poss were known for. You know, I mean, there was no question. We went to Cherokee. He was going to be up above Melinda's Ferry.
They're about to the steam plant.
Yeah, they were going to go as far as they could take it. And that was where they were awesome at. So fishing your strengths, you picked up that ugly head jig, that fly, and you all have confidence in that. And you can't say enough about it, guys. When conditions are tough, go to your strengths. Yes, there's certain techniques that are going to work better for certain water conditions or water temperatures, but don't get out there and try to make yourself do something that you're not comfortable with, because that's what's going to mess you up more than anything. And in all of this, the people that fished their strengths and stuck with it all day long, they did really well, but it still just seemed like there were little bite windows, and if you missed those bite windows, man, it was gone.
Oh, yeah.
And it was gone quick. And then on top of that, bite window plus grouped up fish. So there was little tiny pockets of fish on these bluffs or on these points, and it really, really made a big, big difference to how things played out. So, guys, that is third and second. Jigfish up the river, finding some warmer water, almost 50 degrees. Talked a little bit about me spinning out and letting myself rush my game plan. You got to let your game plan run its course. You got to trust yourself in those conditions. You know it's tough out there. And I should have known. There were boats running all over the place.
Yeah, there was a lot of people that were just struggling. I mean, it was the conditions were set up for a tough day.
Yeah, definitely. And it was bluebird all day long. So, guys, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a quick commercial break. We're going to come back. We're going to break down first place with the Harveys and talk about exactly how things played out. We're going to watch some actual video from their day and talk about it. But we'll be back here in just a second after this commercial break. TNCBA Real Talk Live is brought to you by Tri-City Logistics, Uncle Ray's Beyond Good, and Knoxville TVA Employees Credit Union.
Today's the day to explore the journey ahead. Enjoy life's little moments, because they're all around us, in every smile and in every laugh. cherish the moments that will last a lifetime. With a partner that lasts a lifetime. Enjoy every moment.
Knoxville TBA Employees Credit Union. Join us now.
All right, guys. Hey, and welcome back. All right, we definitely want to say thank you to those sponsors, those partners that we have, and all of our partners in the tournament. Knoxville TVA Credit Union was actually our partner for this first tournament, and Piney Pond was our big fish sponsor for this event. So we had a little big fish prize there for Kelsey, who actually had he outdid himself. He called for 3.5. No, you said 3 3/4.
3 3/4, yeah.
So you shorted yourself a little bit there. Guys, so we're going to get into this. Again, post some questions. We see that we got some questions popping up in Facebook. Some of these we're going to touch on here in just a second. If we don't talk about them, we'll talk to them here in just at the end of the video. But Kelsey, let's go ahead and start talking about your day. And I'm going to go ahead and play the video.
Okay.
And we're going to let the video play, and we're going to talk while that video is going on. And we're going to be looking at what you were seeing, how you were working the bait. So this video here is of their catches from that day. You can see here that you all start out and just talk us through what your thoughts were.
So this was our first stop of the day. Pulled in there, just that's one of the spots that Dad and I like to go to every time we go down there. I mean, it's been good to us in the past. But pulled up there and just was looking at the watercolor, the cold temperatures, looking at the water temperature as well, and just wasn't feeling it. I mean, that sun wasn't up there. I was like, man, it's cold. Let's move on down the lake to another spot that I know we should be fine. So then we moved down the lake, and we pull up to a sunnier bank, which I had more confidence in for what we were going to do. I felt like those fish were going to sit there on those warmer banks. So we pulled up there, and Dad starts throwing a tight line and catches our first keeper, which I want to say that one was probably one of our next biggest fish, or one of the next bigger fish, which was about 280 something, 2.80, something like that. So I mean, he picks up that tight line and catches our first fish.
And that gives you, you're like, okay, here we go.
With looking at the water temperature and looking at, well, I mean, the water temperature is definitely the right temperature, but
for that.
Looking at the color and everything, I'm thinking, man, I just don't have that confidence in it. But then he catches that fish, and I'm like, okay, I've been bitten by it before. I'm picking it up. I'm not putting it down, because I know if they're going to bite it, they're going to bite it.
Right.
So I have all the confidence in the world in it.
But the other thing I want to talk about with this bank here, and it almost looks like when you go from that first bank that you fished to this bank that, I mean, it's like, oh my goodness, it's been like hours.
Yeah.
But it hasn't. Like, literally, this bank is just in the sun, and it catches sun all day long the way that sun moves through the sky. And this bank here, it's catching sunlight at the very beginning of the day, the very end of the day, so it's got it all day long.
Yeah, no, and here's the thing.
I hope it's about to be 4.
We weren't at our first spot maybe 10, 15 minutes before. I was just like, I looked at him. I said, I'm not feeling this. He said, I was thinking the same thing. I said, let's go on down to the lake to this next spot I want to go to. So that's where we go. And that's when it all starts happening.
Now, guys, we had a tight lining video earlier this year on one of our tips, tricks, and how-tos, and you can see here as Kelsey's working this bait, you're lightly imparting that action, but you can see the tip of that rod. And again, this is one of those Dixie Custom tight lining rods.
I loved that thing.
It's an awesome, awesome rod. I've got one of them myself. But you can see him even as he's working this bait that tip out there is just doing all the work for you.
And you just see where every fish that I caught, it's right in the top of its mouth. I mean,
yes. So let's talk about that fly for a second. I know that Thacker had a question here about the type of fly that you were throwing. We've talked a lot about the crawfish fly, that green and orange and stuff, and times that we like to throw it. But what the fly you were throwing is a little bit different than that.
Yeah, it's a duck feather fly. It's called an ugly head, but I mean you can substitute with any duck feather fly. I'm throwing one with chartreuse. I want to say Dad was throwing one with pink and chartreuse, especially for the water conditions we were looking at. I pick up the chartreuse. I mean,
definitely.
That's what we had last year starting out on Holston.
Right.
I picked up that chartreuse. We had a very overcast day. It was, and it just set up for that type of condition. So that's what I was throwing. And if you look here, what we were talking about earlier with those fish being stacked up in small spaces, there's 2 rocks on that bank, and they're probably about 30 to 40 feet apart.
Yeah.
And that's where the majority of those fish came out of, in that one spot. The fish that we caught came out of that.
Yeah. So you guys, once you find them, you don't want to move too quick in these situations, in these scenarios. There we go. I finally got it out of there. But in these scenarios, if you start moving too quick, you're going to run yourself right by some fish.
Oh yeah,
because they're going to be loaded up. And you had a lot of good things going on this point. You've got rock, which is catching that sunlight all day long. It goes back to David and what he asked us about last week when we did the preview show. He talked to us about northern banks and how they fishing those in the wintertime. This is a prime example of that, David. You have this northern bank here, this northern point that catches sunlight from morning until the evening. And so with that going on, these rocks have a ton of heat in them.
Oh, yeah.
But you've also got a boat ramp there. And that boat ramp's going to hold heat, and it's going to hold these fish. So those are all things that are going on that point that are just making it a prime location. You got a lot of good things going on, but key thing being some heat and getting those fish active. But again, you can't be afraid to throw that fly in some of that dingier water. But like you said, you had some chartreuse, some pink. Now talk to me about depth. What kind of depth was the boat sitting in this situation?
I was honestly keeping the boat in about 20 to 18 feet of water.
Okay,
so I mean, for this time of year, that's pretty shallow. I mean,
yeah.
And those fish were coming out of probably anywhere between 5 to 10 feet. I mean, they were shallow. And back to another question that he had. I was throwing it on 6-pound line. I won't go any lower than that. I mean
that gets risky around some of these rocks and stuff.
Well,
going
that
and
it's light enough you can cast it well, and you can get a lot of action out of that bait. Because anytime you go bigger with those really small baits like that, you're going to lose a little bit of action and castability.
Definitely. So I like that 6-pound line, and plus, I mean, the mouths on these smallmouth and stuff, they will tear up. But that's what, like you mentioned, getting that hook right there in the top of the lip keeps that line away from that mouth and then being able to tear it up.
Exactly.
So we're talking sitting in 20 foot. These fish are coming out of that less than 10 foot of water, which may be a little bit shallower than we expected, but with some stain in the water, pulls them up there a little bit shallower. Now, tell me this much. So you all get down there. About how long would you say that bite window lasted for you all down there?
We had our limit in that bite window probably within, I would say, an hour and a half, 2 hours. I mean, it took some work, but I mean, really, when that wind picked up, it kind of slowed things down. But we still caught a couple more after that.
Okay.
And then it really just kind of made it tough,
right,
with that wind. So we kind of just pulled off, and we decided to get out of it a little bit.
So tell me this though, with the wind, it certainly is going to make it tougher with 6-pound test line.
Yes.
And trying to throw a fly.
Yeah.
What did you all change up to while you were out there to try to stay in that same little area, but be able to work those fish if they were still there?
Yeah, we tried a few different things. We tried a jerk bait. We tried.
I think you had an underspin tied on.
I had a underspin Kitech on, and I also had a regular Kitech. I tried both of those, just thinking that little underspin may have a little bit of flash, and that dingy water may
help it out just a little bit.
React, but I could not get them to bite it. I mean, I knew they were there. I mean, you could see we left it come back,
right?
And we picked up a few. We picked up a few of our culls there. So I mean.
But it definitely seemed like once that bite window ended,
yes,
they were done.
Yeah, no, it would shut off and then it would pick back up, periodically.
Right. Okay. And then the next thing that we wanted to talk about to stay with our fishing those kind of the northern banks are things that were catching a lot of sunlight. You talked about the fact I gave Kelsey a little bit of a hard time, I saw him towards the end of the day, and I told him that the Winchester had about 16.5 pounds because he told me he had about 14.5, just to give him a little good scare. I couldn't let him walk in there.
It worked
to the weigh-in just knowing he had it in a bag. So I threw a little bit at him and told him they had about 16.5 pounds. And you all moved back up to that point where you started, and you've talked to me about it in the past. There's a little bit of a ledge there, right?
Yeah.
On that, and it drops into the main. Both of these, like we said, are on the main channel, guys. I'm still going to stick near the mouths of these creeks and stuff this time of year. But the big difference was by this point in the day, at the end, that bank had been sitting in sun now for
a while,
a good 4 or 5 hours. And you pull in there, and what happens?
I hook into another good one.
But
I've got this in the back of my head that somebody else has got 16.5 pounds. So I hook into this one thinking I've got to do this to win the tournament. So here we go. I'm fighting this fish, fighting it, and you could just feel those big head shakes. You know it's a good one. I mean, I caught several 2.5 pounders that day, so I knew what those felt like. I was like, this one's 3+.
This one feels maybe really
4.
good.
It felt better than that 453 I caught that day.
You're like, I'm gonna cull up by a couple pounds, and I'm gonna catch them Winchester boys.
Yeah, that's what's going through my mind. I get it about probably 5 feet from the boat. I never saw the fish.
Yeah,
and then it just comes free, and I'm sitting there thinking, that's it.
That just cost me the win.
That was the fish that was going to make the difference.
It brings me some joy that I could bring you just a little bit of anxiety on the day.
Yeah, it was really weighing on my mind.
Oh, I got like I said, I even called him. I said, hey, Winchester, I've told Kelsey that y'all got 16.5. You make sure you play along at the weigh-in. All right?
Yeah.
So they got you pretty good.
I hope you repented since then.
I did. I went to church on Sunday and asked for some forgiveness on that one. I'll be nicer to you next time.
That would hurt.
Next time, I'm not going to lie to you. Next time, I'm going to be the one with 16.5. I'm just going to take the win from you next time, okay?
I'll have 17.5. Let's go.
All right. All right. So now we're going to play. All right. All right. Boone's coming up. We'll see how this lays down a little bit. This is going to be fun.
I really do think that's going to be a fun tournament.
I do too. I think the way the weather's looking like it's going, like it's going to keep on warming up, and I think that Boone's going to unlock some like the jerk bait, the spinner bait, the crank bait. It'll be interesting to see this place now going into the spring, what the timber looks like now on the lake. But getting back to our Cherokee event, again, guys, we had a great turnout. It was an awesome time out there on the lake. We had a lot of fun, even though it was super cold, had a great weigh-in. One thing I love about these guys is they hang around.
Yeah.
They talk, the fellowship. It was great. Like I said, I love being able to go back and break down these tournaments and do just some recap for myself and think about what I would have done differently. I should have gone back to those brush piles a little bit later on in the day and maybe thrown a Carolina rig through them or something else through them to work through there, maybe even a jerk bait over them some more. I did that a little bit, but I should have given it maybe a little bit more time. But like I said, I wish I would have given some of the dropping fish some more time. But that's the thing, is going back through here and reflecting. One other thing, guys, you probably couldn't hear it in the video when you watched it, but when I released the TNCBA Chasing Ghosts tournament vlog, where there's some more sound that goes with these videos of them catching these fish, the drag. Mm-hmm. All right, that drag is so important. We talked about this on Spinning Reels. You let that drag work and do its job. Kelsey had it set up just perfect. So when you listen and he's fighting that big 4-pounder, you hear that fish just pulling and digging, and even while Kelsey's reeling, it's still pulling drag, but it lets you keep that tension on it.
Yeah, that's key, especially with these little bitty baits. I mean, it's got a light wire hook. You don't want them to straighten out that hook, so you want them to be able to abuse it, basically.
And it's tiny too.
And keep them from coming off while they're running, making those digs and stuff like that, and just keeping that tension, because I want to say that one that I lost got a little bit of tension, and it was gone. I mean, that's the thing.
Right. And Dad had that happen to him this morning. Sometimes early in that morning, he had a reel that he thought wasn't working, but the drag system on it had just totally backed off. And sometimes when you're loading rods or loading reels and stuff, or you'll hit something, or you just never know. And so check your drag constantly when you get out there, especially first thing in the morning. That's always important to do. Kelsey, we got any other questions floating around out there?
I'm not seeing anything at the moment.
All right. That sounds good, guys. I hope y'all have enjoyed this recap of Cherokee. Like I said, if you're heading out there this coming week, this coming weekend, it's going to be super tough. Lower end will not get as messed up as the upper end. The biggest thing you're going to have to deal with on the lower end is that water on Cherokee coming up so much.
Oh, yeah.
So it's going to totally reposition some of those fish. But upper end, my expectation would be that it is going to be super blown out, tons of debris everywhere. I know that there's a Tom's Marine, a White Pine Marine. There's somebody said a kayak tournament and some other tournaments. So there's going to be a lot of people down there on the water unless they cancel them. So if you're out there on the water on Cherokee, guys, take some of these things into account. If you head down the lake, throw you a tight line, whether it's a fly or that gulp minnow. put that thing to work. I know that a jerkbait should be coming on really strong here soon.
If that water keeps warming up, it should.
And if you get into some stain, don't be afraid to pick you up a bitsy bug or a jig. Guys, this has been fun. Kelsey, I appreciate you hanging out with me, talking about what's going on. Next tournament coming up is going to be on Boone at the end of March, the 26th. Guys, I hope y'all can come out and join us. We got a great group of guys to fish with, great fellowship. Kelsey, brother, congratulations on this win.
Thank you.
But I'm still going to try to come after you at Boone.
That's okay.
And the rest of the season. I ain't going to let you walk away with this one.
That's okay.
So, guys, we're going to sign off from here. I hope y'all have a great time. Head on over. I think they're having their last night of the fishing classes tonight. I forget who the two are there. I know Skylar Hamilton, I think, was one of them. So, guys, if you got some time to head out there, I think that starts up at 6:30, so go check that out. Again, be sure to share this video, like this video, follow us on YouTube, and just get the word out there. We'd love to have more guys come fish with us. Again, we love fishing. We love the fellowship, but the goal is to help y'all grow in Christ and help y'all with that walk and edify other brothers and even evangelize the lost. We want guys coming in to fish with us, even if they don't know the Lord, and we can lead them to Christ. There's a lot of things going on in the world that God's coming soon, man.
Come as you are.
Yeah.
I mean, I've watched a lot of people come to Christ through this club, and I mean, just doing something they love.
Yep.
And that's the biggest thing about this club, fishing in this club. I've just been able to grow so much through it. So, I mean, I do.
And people feel so much more at ease in sharing and talking because they have a common passion here. It's not a stranger. You've got something in common with someone else, and it really opens that door to be a witness and share the gospel with other people. And I just hope y'all will come out and join us. If you're a member that's watching this, go out and grab you some guys, some buddies, some couples. We've got some couples fishing with us. We got several father-son teams. So just keep on spreading the word, guys. But we hope y'all have enjoyed. If you got any other questions, y'all send us through Facebook, Instagram, email us, give us a shout, guys. We'll be happy to talk with you. But we'll see y'all on the next video. Until next time, guys, tight line. See y'all.
See you.